So, Jonah, first of all, tell me about word of mouth.
I've spent, at this point, almost 20 years studying word of mouth. There's also lots of boring things that get a lot of word of mouth. We did a big study a few years ago. We looked at tens of thousands of brands, and we looked at online word of mouth and we looked at offline word of mouth. So, posts, for example, on social media and more face-to-face or phone conversations. And we found is quite interesting. Online, the more interesting, more surprising, more exciting a brand was, more product was, the more people talked about it. Offline, that wasn't the case. Actually, offline, interesting products and services didn't get any more word of mouth than boring ones. And the reason is quite interesting. So if you think about it, when we share things online, we're not sharing everything that happened to us, right? We're picking and choosing among the things we want to share and skipping sharing a whole bunch of things if it's not relevant. Well, offline, we don't have that luxury, right? You just asked me a question. I'm sitting there going, got to answer him. I've got to say something, right? And so there's a tendency to want to fill in that conversational space, even if it's not the most interesting thing in the world. I don't have the time to think about the most interesting thing in the world. I've got to respond to your question. And so I'm more likely just to say something, even if it's not the most interesting thing. And so think about how often we talk about the weather, for example, or what we're doing this weekend. It's not that those are the most interesting things we can think of, but it's because they're top of mind. So we're doing this interview today. Maybe later today, I'll talk to someone about it. What parts will I talk about? Why will I talk about some parts rather than others? You go on vacation, you come back, you don't talk about everything that happened on vacation. You pick some things that share and others not to. And so it's not random why that happens, though. There's really a science behind it. If we understand the science of communication, if we understand the science of social transmission, of word of mouth, we can really get people to talk about it.
I come from India, and in India right now, we're seeing the D2C revolution, just like America saw 10 years ago. And brands are pouring millions of dollars into generating excitement. But after spending millions of dollars, they realize that that's not enough. We need word of mouth. We need referrals.
Yeah.
Can you walk me through the steps framework and help me understand each principle to make a product go viral?
And so in Contagious, I put them in a framework called the STEPS framework. And that's an acronym. The S is for social currency. The T is for triggers. The E is for emotion. The first P is public. The second P is practical value. And that last S is stories. And each of those is a psychological driver of why things get talked about and why they get shared. It's not about products versus services versus ideas. It's not about expensive things versus cheap things. It's not about, B2B versus B2C. It's really about the psychology of why we share, right? People often have an intuition that going viral is random, that it's luck, that it's chance, right? So-and-those, or, I've often been in meetings with brands where they say, we need to make something viral. And they just, snap our fingers and something will become viral. Both are not true, right? It's not random. It's not luck. It's not chance. There's a science behind it. We've looked at thousands of pieces of online content. So a few years ago, we did a big analysis of every article written by the largest newspaper in the United States over a 6-month period, looking at thousands of articles to figure out what makes the most emailed list and what doesn't based on the content that it is. We've looked at tens of thousands of brands, so all sorts of products, services, and ideas. We've looked at millions of purchases across the United States, around the world. Again and again, these same 6 factors come up.
Let me give you a boring product.
Okay.
Let's take a blender. Can you give me a case study, or can you reverse engineer? How will you make a blender go viral?
If you think about it, a blender's not the most exciting. No offense to blender manufacturers, but I don't think anyone say, like a hot new piece of technology. The blender's really, exciting. The blender's kind of lower down on the list, but there's a great example. So a number of years ago, this company Blendtec, it's from the US, hires a new marketing guy. And he walks into the office and he notices a pile of sawdust on the floor. And he says, what's with the sawdust on the floor? What's going on? Are we building a new part of the building? Why is there sawdust on the floor? And his colleague goes, well, the CEO is doing what he tries to do every day, which is break blenders. The CEO of this company would take 2x4 pieces of wood, Bic lighters, pens, change, golf balls, throw them in a blender to see if the blender was tough enough to cut. He wanted to make the most strong blender he could. And so the marketing guy sees this and he goes, this is genius. So he takes what is already happening. CEO is already blending stuff, buys a sort of a white lab coat for a CEO, puts a pair of goggles, videotapes his CEO, puts it online. The rest is history. This particular video where he blends an iPhone has, I think at this point, like 20 million views.
Wow.
The set has over 200 million. Blender sales go up over 700%. Now, anybody would be happy with a 700% sales increase, right? That would be amazing. But to me, that's actually not the most remarkable thing. What's also remarkable is they did it for a $50 marketing budget, right? They didn't hire actors. It's the goofy CEO in his white lab coat, just sort of talking and blending things. Still not the most remarkable thing about this to me. The most remarkable thing about this to me is they did this for one of the least exciting things we can think of, which is a blender. And so, if your listeners are sitting there going, great, I love these ideas, but I can't apply this. My thing isn't really exciting. It's worth remembering the blender because it's not just about whether the product seems exciting. It's whether you can find that inner remarkability, whether you can show people rather than tell people why your offering is so great. And I think this is a big challenge for companies and organizations, right? They often say, oh, I make a really powerful blender. Well, if I get up there and I say, hey, we make a really powerful blender, people say, well, that's nice, but I'm not going to tell anybody about that. But if you show them a video of a person blending an iPhone, it's an amazing video. Everyone should watch this video. It's a great video. He drops his iPhone in a blender. It starts up, right? The thing gets torn to shreds. Right? There's smoke coming out of it. It ends up when he turns it upside down, there's like one piece of metal from the outside and the rest is just basically dust. And you're sitting there going, first of all, this is amazing, right? Second of all, you learn, wow, this blender's really powerful. Otherwise it couldn't have cut an iPhone. And so you learn exactly the attribute they want you to remember, right? They're a B2B blender. They're in your local smoothie shop. They want to show people how powerful they are. But I think the third thing is, this is so amazing. I've got to tell somebody else, right? I know somebody who would love this. I know somebody who think it's really interesting. And so this is one of the principles that we'll probably talk about, this S, which is social currency, right? Right. There's a great example. Some of your listeners may have seen this a few years ago. Volvo trucks, so the big sort of semi-trucks, where they had a video where Jean-Claude Van Damme, this old action hero, is doing a split between two trucks that are driving backwards down a road. This video got hundreds of millions of views. But not only, it's amazing, right? Who would have thought someone could do a split between two trucks? But again, if you watch that video, what they're really showing you is we have really precise steering. How do you know they have precise steering? Well, otherwise he'd be dead. He'd be falling down on the ground. He wouldn't be able to do a split between these two trucks. The better something makes us look, the more likely we are to talk about it and share it. I think often brands think a lot about, okay, well, how does my ad make my product or service look? Or how does my website, what I put on my website, sort of, how does it represent my offering? And everybody likes paid media because they can control it, right? We like owned media because we can control it. Word of mouth isn't about us as brands. We've got to think about my listener, my audience, what's in it for them? Right? How are they going to look? How are they going to look to other people? What's going to make them want to do this? Because they don't have to do it at all, right? Unlike paid media, where they kind of have to watch our ad or at least sit through the interruption, with earned media, they don't have to share. And so we've got to think about what's going to make them want to share, what's in it for them that will encourage them to pass it along.
If this clip gave you value, please subscribe to this channel so that we can keep bringing you game-changing business insights.